And welcome to the stage, Paul. Take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can I have a thumbs up from general audience? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Claire. Excellent. Okay. Oh, yes, and I'm getting a... Thanks, Andrew. Okay, let's assume... Yes, good. Thank you, everyone. Hello, my name's Paul Gallagher. I'm the program manager from Glasgow Film Theatre. And this session that we're going to do now is cultural cinema in the UK. So, you know, kind of an all-encompassing, let's answer every question there is session. So we're going to try and do that. And I'll set the sort of context for that in just a moment. But first, and I should say, for those watching and for those who are visually impaired, I am a white man with dark hair and a purple jumper. And I've got a great panel for this discussion today, so I'd just like them to introduce themselves, please, starting with Joan on my right.
Hello, I'm Joan Parsons. I'm head of QFT in Belfast. I am a white woman with grey and brown hair and a purple dress.
I'm Anna. My name is, my last name as well is Germanidi. I work at Modern Films. I'm a white woman with brown hair and some white hair on the sides, and wearing a dark-colored shirt with blue flowers. And I'm the director of exhibition and programming at Modern Films, looking after the release strategy for all our titles.
Hi, my name is Hope Dickson Leach. I'm a filmmaker, writer-director. I'm a middle-aged white woman with big glasses and red lips and grey jumper.
Thank you. So we have an exhibitor, a distributor, and a filmmaker, which I know sounds like the beginning of a very niche joke. But in fact, we're talking about very serious things. So the point of this session is really to acknowledge that we're all in very unsettling times. And I'm sure that lots of us in the room are kind of feeling nervous about how things are in our industry at the moment. In the little blurb in the This Way Up programme, the context of this was really set by the abrupt closure of the CMI, the Centre for the Moving Image, the parent company of Edinburgh Film House, Belmont Film House in Aberdeen, and Edinburgh International Film Festival, closely followed by closures of Base Camp in Middlesbrough, Lighthouse in Wolverhampton, and since this copy was written, even more closures have been happening in the arts and cuts in the arts. So the questions that we've been tasked to look at are, while cultural institutions face funding cuts and rising operational costs, and audiences and employees alike struggle with the cost of living and energy crises, how do we champion and bolster the cultural value of cinema? And how do we sustain the necessary infrastructure at the heart of a thriving independent cinema ecosystem? So we've got 40 minutes. So what I think is, what we would like to do is essentially model a conversation that hopefully will continue for the rest of these 2 days. We certainly don't see ourselves as having the clear answers to these questions, but we've had a talk ahead and think we can talk around some questions that might be helpful to set a tone for us all to discuss these things and hopefully support each other and have some hope in the midst of what are genuinely tough times. So in that vein, there's going to be a time for questions. You can submit questions on Slido, but I'd also welcome comments because I want to acknowledge that, you know, these perspectives on the panel here are just a fraction of all the perspectives and experiences that are in the whole group here. And we certainly don't want to assume to be speaking for everyone here. So I'm going to ask the panel some specific questions about their context and their perspectives, and then it would be great to hear some other perspectives from in the room as well. So hopefully that sounds okay. So Joan, I'm going to come to you first because you're working in a venue day in, day out. Mm-hmm. So how are you and your audiences feeling the impact of the current financial challenges and other challenges?
I think our audiences are feeling the pinch in their wallets. I think that kind of translates into thinking about how many visits they might make, how much secondary spend they might be willing to do, which obviously, you know, is a massive kind of impact on the business. And also thinking about kind of fundraising, whether they're willing to kind of pay that extra little bit of money to support fundraising. So I think it kind of plays into the whole way that you think about a transactional relationship as an audience member. From a staff perspective, I think, you know, all of us are affected by cost of living crisis, but those of us on lower incomes will be affected more severely. And it's really important to acknowledge that our staff members in part-time roles, on kind of the lower wages within an organisation, will be feeling that in a much more acute way than people higher up within organisations that have slightly more kind of cushion, or perhaps they've got savings and stuff like that. So I think I'm very aware of the impact it has on staff, and trying to check in with them and say, you know, are you okay? We've had staff that have been, you know, homeless for short periods of time recently, and trying to support them through that. And I just think everybody needs to be super kind to each other, and that includes audiences and staff, because I think when you're like against it, there's a bit of a kind of bristling that people have. And I think, yeah, anything we can do that puts people at ease, doesn't make judgments about whether or not they're willing to spend or not. Like, we're not kind of making judgments about them as people, whether or not they want to buy a glass of wine or not. Like, that's their decision, and being respectful of that. Meanwhile, thinking about kind of like, actually, what does that mean for our bottom line? If everybody buys one less glass of wine every year, you know, we can quantify that. We know exactly what that will mean, and it's tens of thousands of pounds. So I think being really aware of the impact and trying to kind of think further ahead, what might that impact look like in a year or, you know, 2 years? These things aren't flash in the pan changes. They're kind of long-term potential disasters, which are society-wide, and how we can plan accordingly is an ongoing challenge.
And not to totally put you on the spot, but I think, you know, it's good to talk about real practical things. Like, do you feel like you and QFT have the tools? Are you going to make it? You know, obviously hearing when that happened with CMI, I know all of us were like...
I think the impact of CMI closing was that kind of like any assumptions that we had that there are untouchable organisations out there were immediately wiped. And I think, I don't know if I really ever bought that as an assumption anyway, but I think audiences have that assumption that like something's existed for a period of time, therefore it will always exist. And I think it kind of like immediately flagged up that that is not the case, and we can't rely on that. So we have to be much more active in that kind of proposition of like, you know, being open about what our plans are, transparency about the business model. From a QFT perspective, yeah, we're going to be okay. Like, our audiences are good, almost where we need them to be post-pandemic. We are very lucky. We're in a very lucky position because we are a department of a university. So we have, you know, a cash flow that doesn't rely on us to build into it, and a level of security that I think we would, you know, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be here now, but we also wouldn't have been here now 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and all the other kind of struggles that the organisation's been through over the years. So I think we'll be okay. What we will look like and what the operation will look like, who knows? And I think, you know, it's important to keep reinventing things and not just stagnate. But I quite like to reinvent in a spirit of like positivity and not in a kind of like responsive, miserable way.
Thanks. Hope, I'm going to come to you next. So as a filmmaker and an audience member, I'm interested to hear, what do you think our industry should be focusing on, particularly to ensure we stay connected with audiences, as there is that danger of losing them at this point?
I think in the opening question, you used the word value, and I feel like that is something that's really central to this whole conversation and that we need to remember, which is the value of the work that we're doing. When you're trying to make a film, you're constantly being asked who the audience is, which is it's kind of horrific thing, because you know, you don't want to really be thinking about that. You want to be thinking about the story, but that is kind of constantly what you're asked. And you know, so there is an assumption right from the beginning that you are telling a story and there is a value to this communication. It is something that is valuable. And I think what we need to figure out is what is that value now as an audience member? What are we willing to pay for? What are we willing to turn up for? What do we want to turn up for? The kinds of films that sort of I'm being interested in making, trying to make, are films that would be shown in cinemas like all of yours. And therefore, for me, this is personal and real, and I don't want your spaces to go, because I think therein lies the death of cinema, quite frankly, and for all the wonderful things that platforms do for us as audience members and filmmakers, and they incredible access and lots of value there. Cinema is such a complex art form, and so many of us love it because we enjoy it together, and for those of us who are making it, that's how we kind of want it to be made. So I think what do I want? I want you guys to survive, and I want to know how to do that. Now, earlier this year, I did something which was kind of in a fit of not being able to make a film at all because, pandemic, and spent some time working with theatre. So we did a kind of hybrid event. And that was really interesting because it sold out in a day, all the tickets. There weren't very many, but it was really interesting because it sort of proved that audiences wanted something different. There was something different. And I think as an audience member, I also felt this kind of post-pandemic, I don't want to go back. I can't go back to just the same thing I went to before. So I think we are all examining what are the things that we want, what are the stories we want to tell, where are the places we want to tell them, and as audience members, what are we willing to kind of cough up for? And yeah, I'm not really answering anything, but there are so many different ways to think about this. But I think this idea of value and what do we value as audience members, and we know that live events have done really well, and we know that model works, but we also know that model relies on lots of different things coming together, and it is vulnerable to the live event syndrome of the pandemic or whatever else it might be that's sort of exclusionary. So it's not sort of sustainable in that way. The thing that feels more essential to me than ever is the buildings and the infrastructure, and how, as much time as I've spent with the theatre recently and seeing as a model of an art form that doesn't make nearly as much money as cinema makes, the kind of the way they have to work. We need technology in a way that they don't, we need our cinemas, we need our experts, we need all these things. And it's kind of got to a point where I feel like we need to make the argument that cinema is an art form that we have to invest in the same way that we invest in theatre and visual art and all of those sort of things. And we need to kind of actually knock on the door of the government and say, you need your schools, we know you're strapped for cash right now, but if we lose these, we're losing an art form, and there's no going back from that. So I think there's an urgency right now, which is why I think a lot of filmmakers are really trying to get involved and support this conversation, because we understand how vital these spaces are for our own work and the form itself, which is something we all love in this room.
Yes, indeed. Thanks. Anna, it would be great to hear, sort of from a distributor's perspective, what is like the current picture at Modern Films, and how do like cinema closures and funding cuts within exhibitors affect the conversations that you're having and decisions you're having to make? I mean, I imagine when a place like Filmhouse closes, that's a real strategic bombshell to you guys. Yeah,
it is, of course. It's incredibly important that venues do not close, that we have a healthy industry. We can't do this without cinemas. Where are we going to show our films? That's where we want to show our films. Obviously, venues closing is very tough, not only financially, but mostly because this is where all our films find their audiences. Like Filmhouse, I mean, we play every title there. It's incredibly upsetting not to have it. as part of our release. I think the conversations are quite similar to what we've heard from Joan and Hope. But in essence, it comes down to the films that we release that are smaller, independent titles. They have very strong social issues in their core. They struggle at the moment a lot. The bigger titles don't struggle as much at the moment. The smaller titles will struggle much longer than the rest. And that's, it's inevitable. It will take more time. We see that the audiences are returning. We try to keep having like a positive attitude. And although we see that we're missing perhaps the 35 to 45-year-olds, for example, that were already used to watching stuff online and found it very easy to jump on the kind of, online viewing during the pandemic, and they are now looking at the costs and I'm not gonna go as often as I used to go. So there are multiple different layers to this, and as I said, we're trying to crack on and still release the films that we want to release, and not let all of those problems influence our decisions in a way that we will stop releasing the films that we love, because it really trickles down to everything. I mean, if the cinemas stop showing the films that we are releasing because they are smaller titles and they might not make as much money, and we're not going to acquire those titles, then festivals won't show those titles, funders won't fund those titles, sales agents won't pick up. And producers will stop producing those titles, and filmmakers will stop making them. And then what are we doing? We're going to lose all the really important stories that general audiences relate to when they go to the cinema. So every film is important, but we have to try and save those stories that are really unique, and they won't find their space in the larger kind of exhibition spaces, and we need those community-based venues to survive. We need to make sure that everyone survives in this.
I agree. There's more that I want to come to with the panel, but I just want to check, do we have any? We do. Okay. Let's go to Sally and hear what you're saying.
Yeah, we do. Can everyone hear me?
Not yet, I don't think.
I think it just takes its time and then pops back on. Hello?
Can we get the mic on at the front, the handheld mic?
Hello? Thank you. Right, super. There's two that have come about the same subject, so I'm going to merge those together. We've had some small successes with a pay what you can model. Do you think there could be more utilisation of such pricing structures to maintain audience levels? A couple of people have asked that question about pay as you go, pay as you feel.
Do you want me to?
I would like you to answer that, please, Joan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do some sort of like similar thing in Glasgow. So we've never, or at least not in my living memory, done that in QFT. And it certainly would be something we'd be interested in looking at. I think I would have concerns about when it is and all that kind of like logistical stuff. I don't think, well, I don't know if I want to come down entirely on that, actually. I'm going to say it. I don't think you could do that for a whole venues programme all the time, because I think you would risk really jeopardising those box office peaks that you need in order to subsidise the box office troughs. But I think it certainly could be something that we can look at innovating around, also through FAN as well, thinking about how the network can perhaps facilitate sharing those learnings across the UK. So I think there's stuff to be learned from it, and I've seen it work. I've been to venues where they kind of do various sliding scales and offer guidance, like if you can afford such and such, then you should probably be paying for X, Y, Z. And I think that makes loads of sense. I don't know how much I could do it from a kind of like logistical all the time perspective.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask, have you ever considered, or this may be a very naive question, a subscription system where somebody is, I know you have membership.
There's going to be a panel about it.
There's a panel about
There's a
it.
panel, sorry.
Coming up later this
There's a
afternoon.
panel about it at 12:35, I believe, with Eleanor. So come back and we'll talk about that one. Because I'm curious about that too, subscription. How do you make that work? But we'll find out.
Because
in a
I'm
bit.
just going to say, I would happily pay a
Yeah.
subscription to a cinema.
Yeah, we looked at it when we changed our
Sorry.
membership programs a few years ago, and we could not make it work financially. But we are a small cinema that runs at high capacity. I think it's not the same if you have a lower capacity or more screens or anything like that. We just couldn't. To make it work financially, it would have had to have been such an expensive subscription. But I was like, oh, I feel like that's not setting the right tone.
Yeah.
So we didn't.
In terms of pay what you can and pay what you decide, like as Joan mentioned, we do elements of that at GFT. And as the chair, I don't want to jump too much into, but there's going to be a Film Hub Scotland breakfast where our financial director is going to do a big presentation about. That's not happened yet, has it? Film Hub Scotland. No, oh, I don't know. Like, if I'm wrong, the presentation will exist that can be shared. Where David's looked into Pay What You Decide stats, and basically Pay What You Decide is working really well for us as a way to expand the breadth of the programme, but it's not primarily about making cinema. It's not the same as Pay What You Can, which is more about like make cinema as accessible as possible with money not being a barrier. I think that's great, and I think some festivals that we work with, like Squiff, Scottish Queer International Film Festival, they really pioneered that, and Glasgow Short Film Festival does it, Take One Action does it. It requires sort of working out agreements with each one, so the finances are tricky when you're the venue to sort of make it work, but I, for one, am really up for doing that work to make it work, because I think it is essential really at the moment for us to remove that financial barrier as much as possible, although that's tough because where's the money going to come from? But yeah, it's a great question and a good thing to pursue in your venues, I think. Shall we have another one?
Yeah, absolutely. So when talking about the subject and venues closing, we forget to talk about our venues as community spaces and not just the art form. How do we amplify that voice?
This is great. We were going to come on to communities, so I'll just use this as an opportunity to do that. In fact, I wanted to just quote something that Sana Jehul, who's program director at Glasgow Short Film Festival, she wrote in an opinion piece in The Skinny called Rip It Up, which is quite a provocative piece. But she said in there, the current approach isn't sustainable because funding priorities are dominated by commercial growth and status interests and lack focus on art form innovation or community investment or on how the grassroots can benefit the institutions and vice versa. And Joan, I wanted to come to you, sort of coming off that question about community and Sana's point about focusing on community and innovation. Can you respond to that idea of like looking to work with or be inspired by communities and grassroots?
Yeah, absolutely. I would slightly disagree with the statement as well.
You can.
I don't think funding priorities always align with commercial growth, particularly BFI funding. It doesn't say in there like you should be making millions of whatever. I think operating a business aligns with commercial thinking. I think in terms of community, I think it's really important to look beyond our own UK borders and actually think a bit more internationally. There's so much amazing work happening in the UK, but also beyond, around community cinemas. I was really inspired last year visiting the Key Cinema in Paris, which was occupied at that moment by people who absolutely adamantly did not want that to close and were just living in the cinema, putting on films for free every single night, programmed by a collective, in a building that was like realistically probably wouldn't pass any kind of health and safety regulations, selling beer without a license. Like, I'm not suggesting we all do that, but I personally was like, this is kind of it. This is kind of the spirit of the thing. And I feel like if there's a way of that translating into the way that we operate, that gives us a bit more flexibility, that buys into that idea that we are a collective. Each cinema is a collective of audiences and of employees. And if we can kind of like take bits of that kind of learning, and a little bit like what you were saying about the kind of pay as you can models that the festivals have been piloting. You know, festivals have led the way in that space. Why can't we as venues learn from that? So I think, yeah, I think keeping your mind open to opportunities and learning from beyond just your little bubble. And I think in Belfast we are, like, you know, pretty isolated from the UK and like from the Republic. We are our own little thing, and it can get a bit kind of like the walls are closing in sometimes. But actually, like, thinking, do you know what, we're part of an industry, we're part of a sector in the UK, we're part of a sector in Europe, we're beyond that, and we can learn accordingly. So I think using it for inspiration is the key.
Yeah, and hope in Edinburgh, in the wake of the Filmhouse closure, we've seen what that really means, like a film community, and what that actually is on the ground. And I wondered from your perspective, like, do you think, because my question is, can that community really bring something back? Like, can a community cinema sort of come out of the ashes of Filmhouse? What do you think? And I know that's a tough question, but I want you to talk about it.
I mean, I think there are two things. One is saving the building, which is, you know, this thing we're all facing with this infrastructure problem. Who's paying for infrastructure? How are we sustaining it? How are we developing it? Obviously, I think Filmhouse hasn't done the work on the building over the last 10 years that, say, the GFT did, and kind of, you know, because obviously there was all that time and investment spent on developing a new building. So that is kind of one of the things that Filmhouse is facing, is this, you know, I think it's old-fashioned building, and it needs, you know, to be redesigned. However, it does have 3 good cinemas, and they're great, and it has an identity. And I think when something like this happens, it is galvanising a community. If you look at their crowdfunder, they've had, I think, 1,500 people so far have donated, which is a huge amount in a week. You know, it really is. And so I think, you know, there is a will for this. And as Joan said, it sort of, this happening spurred us all on to suddenly go, oh shit, this could happen. We could lose this thing. And it's very valuable in a city where festivals are, you know, a lifeblood, as Edinburgh is. Whether the Filmhouse can host all these things that we now want our venues to be. And I think the question is, what do we want them to be? You know, I think I was reading something recently about something called third places. Do people know what I mean by that? So your third place is a space that's not your work or your home. And it's a kind of really diminishing space in society, for example, in societies like in rural societies where you travel by car a lot, things like this, and in spaces where people walk a lot, you have a lot more of them, and they're incredibly important. As we all know, so many of your venues are, you know, inclusive, opening opportunities for people to be looked after, and kind of modelling the kinds of environment that I think a lot of people here are talking about in terms of trying to provide spaces for communities and kind of as educators, as provocateurs, as whatever these things might be. And just thinking about the cinema as what should it actually be, and that comes back to the audience question. Bear with me a sec. I sit on a thing called the National Partnership for Culture with the Scottish Government, and we were pulled together to help the Scottish Government make happen its culture strategy. What's the word?
Facilitate?
I don't know. Yeah. I'm really useful member of that team, obviously. Implement. But one of the things that's really interesting is that understanding how little money the Scottish Government has and the government has in terms of, you know, investing for all the things that it needs to do. Looking at how basically it's about sneaking in. Oh well, we can get culture if we smash it in with the education, or we can keep this if we put it in with health. And you know, and when you look at a government like we have here, who are very keen on and have all these key values that they've stated and that how to implement them, as someone who's sort of applying for funding or trying to, you know, I think there are sneaky ways you can kind of go, okay, well actually, how are we going to get a government to pay for our building? You know, and I know all of you are doing this all the time, and you're all doing funding applications and all that kind of stuff. But we do seem to be in a particular moment where there is an energy around 4-day working weeks. There's an energy around the conversation of, you know, universal basic income. There are energies around kind of inclusive architecture and all these things. And there is a moment here where I wonder whether we need to, you know, take this breath and just kind of go, actually, what could we dream that this space could be like a sort of, and do we need to look beyond cinema? So you've talked about cinema communities internationally and nationally, but do we need to go to film, to art and to theatre and just say, let's share, right? Let's all do this. We can share our spaces. Our art forms are all interconnected. We know a lot of cinemas obviously get a huge income from, NT Live and all those things. Maybe we should be, in order to save ourselves, maybe we should be kind of reaching out to those communities as well. So, yeah.
Now, I'm aware that we are running low on time. I wanted to ask you another question, Anna, but is that okay? Do we have, okay. Because it would be great just to get a sense from you of having a UK-wide perspective, I guess, working with all kinds of exhibitors. What does that tell you at the moment about the health of our industry from that kind of wider perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some really good points from both Joan and Hope about collectivity, and I think collectively we have more power than we realize. Like we're all in this together. We should be working more closely together, and we saw that happen during the pandemic when we most needed each other, and we worked really closely, and it just felt like we were sort of on the right track. So we should not be forgetting all the things that we learned during the pandemic. It was a horrifying, horrifying time, and we all went through a huge amount of shock, physically, mentally, everything. But there were lessons that we learned from it, and I think working with venues and working with other art spaces is really important, because at the end of the day, I mean, what are we going to do by ourselves? Like, we can't, as distributors, say, okay, well, we'll try and save ourselves. It doesn't work that way. And we also see how, for example, curation is really important. Like when we work with venues that have really high level of curation, that they take time and effort, and they understand that it needs patience to create new habits for audiences, that is so important. I am always in awe of that, because it's not easy, and everyone has to play a little bit safe at this time. But it's so important that you try to give audiences something that will challenge them. If they can find all these things at home super easily on the front page of any home entertainment platform, that is not what a venue should give. A venue should give you something that you didn't expect to see, perhaps, and that you trust the venue, you trust the programmers, and you say, okay, well, if they're saying that I should go to this. That's what will bring people back, like, more often to the cinema, because of course we're gonna think about the cost, but at the end of the day, for me personally, and I know for a lot of people, so as an audience member, the cinema is my safe space. And it is the space where I feel the most comfortable outside of my house, sometimes even more than my house. And it's where, I want to watch films when I'm not feeling well, when I'm feeling well, when, at all times. But I do want to see something different. I want to see something that will, it will bring me out. So at the end of the day, what we see as distributors working with multiple venues, and not only venues, but also organizations, and, we do a lot of outreach. We see that those are the events that will bring people out to venues, the ones that you sort of don't necessarily expect to choose by yourself, perhaps. Like you're like, okay, yeah, I really want that kind of help.
I think that's a great challenge and a great encouragement for us, and thanks. I think that is all we have time for.
You can fit one more in.
For one more?
Yeah.
Then we'll take one.
There's quite a good one that was a good wrap-up question. For each of the panellists, what lessons can be learned from the closure of CMI and the other venues we've discussed?
In 30 seconds. I mean, I think, like you already said, Joan, your lesson that as the...
Don't take things for granted.
Exactly.
Look after your buildings.
Yeah.
Anna?
Yeah, look after your partners and work together really closely. Don't let things get to that point. Communicate with each other and try to help each other.
Can't hope.
this is really specific, but I agree with what they've said. But I think look to the future as well. Look to the next generation of who are the people going to be. You know, I've got children and I'm constantly trying to take them to the cinema, and it's so hard. And I just think if you can, as well as all the other ways that you're being inventive around audiences, just don't forget that children and parents are desperate to come to the cinema, and we will pay money.
All right, thanks. Well, thanks, everyone. And I hope that was a helpful conversation. Like I said, I'm sure there's more comments that came through. Please keep this conversation going through these 2 days. Hopefully we can all come out with some constructive things. Anyway, please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you to everyone on the panel, and again for your Slido questions. Just bear with me because I have a few bits of information to tell you, because you've got a heap of choices right now, which is very exciting for you. So the first is there is coffee. So where you came in, there's coffee. Go and enjoy it. If you're at home, make yourself a coffee. If you are at home, there's going to be an online networking facilitated by the wonderful Neil Ramji, so you can go onto that and meet some people that you might not have met before. We are also hosting the wonderful BFI Network Shorts. That'll be next door in Cinema 2. So if you want to grab a coffee, sit and watch some short films, please do. There's a facilitated networking session for people in person. That's going to be upstairs in the meeting room. And it's just going to be a really nice, non-scary, I promise, way of just talking to people you haven't met, meeting some new colleagues, continuing this amazing conversation in the room. There's also going to be a projection tour, so anybody who wants to go on the projection room tour, which I hear is very exciting, go and wait at the reception desk where you got your delegate badge. And finally, so much for you, you can go on the AR tour, and for that you need to again go to the delegate desk and wait there, and you'll be set up and you can go for a bit of a walk around Dundee and experience that. And then all the way through the day, don't forget that right downstairs is the VR if anybody wants to grab a coffee and go and try that out. So hopefully that's enough choice. There's a lot of people staring at me going, what on earth did you just say? We will be outside directing you, so shout what you want to do and we will point you in the right direction.